Hey scholars, welcome to chapter 11-2, and we're looking at how can we actually protect and sustain marine biodiversity long term. That's our main focus of chapter 11-2. So we're going to get right into it today, and there are legal protections for some of the endangered and threatened marine species. It's very hard to protect these species because, as we are growing in population, our ecological footprint is expanding, as well as our fish print, what we call, is expanding because people still love to eat food that comes from the sea. So that's actually a growing problem. Much of the ocean damage, though, isn't visible because the ocean is so large. We don't really realize that we have affected it too much until it's too late. And the oceans are also incorrectly viewed as kind of an inexhaustible resource, which we saw in chapter 11-1, that the Atlantic cod situation proves this on So most of the ocean also lies outside of legal jurisdiction as well of any one country. So we have many countries, many different viewpoints kind of using the ocean and slowly deteriorating. So it's very hard to gain legal protection for these endangered and threatened species because of all these different reasons. But one case they will talk about are protecting whales, and it has been a success story so far for the most part. The cetaceans, which are toothed whales and baleen whales, is the big grouping, this fancy sciencey word for whales in general. That's encompassing two different types of whales. We'll look at both those in a second. But let's talk about the protection and how it started. Well, in 1946, we had the IWC, the International Whaling Commission, that literally came together and was trying to, basically a bunch of countries that wanted to set forth goals to, protect whales and keep their populations thriving. Well, in 1970, U.S. decided to stop all commercial whaling in the country, in the United States, off our coast. And we also banned all the imports of whale products in 1970. And in 1986, there was a moratorium, which is basically a legal term that means we're going to postpone commercial whaling for right now. We're not going to, it's illegal for right now, but we might change our minds later, basically is what it boils down to. And there were some pros of this. A lot of different whale species, this is not just for the U.S., but the IWC in general came up with this moratorium. And it saved and grew populations of many different species of whales, toothed and baleen types. So that was the pro of it. The con of it was really that it really did some damage to other countries that really relied on, well, I shouldn't say damage, but some people really viewed that moratorium as very, very negative, and they really looked to overthrow the IWC because of the fact that they said that it kind of contradicted their what they've stood for and their history of their country, like in Japan and other different island countries. And Norway as well was one that really defies this IWC. So there's just a couple of different cons there where people were really fighting this moratorium and still decided to just basically not follow it. And that has had some. That's where you see shows like Whale Wars, things like that, off the Japan coast, trying to stop those whaling ships and whaling companies. So those are just that's a little bit on protecting whales. Again, very hard because everyone has a different view. These are just examples of cetaceans, which are basically, there are two different types, toothed whales and baleen whales. You notice the toothed whales basically have teeth that they use to eat meat. Narwhal, bottlenose dolphin, killer whales, sperm whales. While as the baleen whales are ones that are filter feeders. They literally use their filtration to eat krill and things like that, and there's lots of different types of those. The minke whale is one that really has had many problems because its ranges do go off of the Japan and Norway, and they actually have been still on the decline because of how many whales, thousands of whales a year, are taken off those coasts. So kind of a sad story, but also one that has some hope because a lot of countries have been following that moratorium. So that's just one example. And I'll show you this picture, but it's kind of a sad picture of a whale being harpooned and the death of one whale. This is some. Let's take a look at some tourism. Tourism can be a way to actually be an incentive to sustain aquatic biodiversity by using tourism, like we talked about the sea otters in Chapter 5, and even whales. I mean, I don't know if you've ever been up to New England or those areas, but they have great whale watching tours, California as well, and that brings in a lot of money, financial gain for those different areas. So that it can be definitely an incentive for people to really protect those species. Another thing called reconciliation ecology, as you protect, different species and ecosystems, you're basically reconciling things that have gone wrong. So like rebuilding a reef or things like that would be considered reconciliation ecology, kind of making up for what you've destroyed. And there's another case study on another marine species, which was the leatherback turtle, ones that we rarely ever find in North Carolina. The leatherback, we find lots of loggerheads and green sea turtles, not a whole lot of leatherbacks. But Carl Safina, which wrote this book, The Voyage of the Turtle, studied leatherback turtles for years and figured out their threats to those species, like trawlers, pollution, and even climate change could have problems with those. And now he's kind of, that book and a bunch of other books and people who have kind of jumped on, sea turtles, because there are very select few out there, have actually inspired whole communities to protect turtles. Actually, I would say a lot of Surf City and Topsail and maybe even Emerald Isle have really taken it upon themselves to make protecting sea turtles a good thing and a positive thing. And this is just one look at how large. Actually, Carl defined in his book these as being like one of the last great dinosaurs, because they really start off as like the size of a $50 and grow to these ginormous, I made that word up, but huge species, huge turtle species that they are today. This is another one that talks about reconciliation ecology, and this is Reuven Yosef, actually off the coast of Israel, who basically got really good at growing and rehabilitating injured coral. And he actually did so and literally built the Red Sea Star restaurant around this reconciled coral reef that he's basically building. He took wire mesh and basically built a wall and attached the rehabilitated injured coral with use of some low stimulant electricity, as well as some other different and nice fresh marine water, and brought them back to health, planted them on his reef, and literally created a ginormous, again, I'm using the word again, wall or window, so that way his people in his restaurant, his customers could view that. And that actually, he used that as an attraction, is making money off of it while restoring the ecosystem, which is really cool. So that was just a cool story off the coast of Israel there. Another one is marine sanctuaries. There's ways of protecting ecosystems as a whole and then the species within those. Offshore fishing is another one that, near shores of countries, we don't really have, we have exclusive economic zones where offshore fishing is really good off the coast. And the high seas is so far offshore that there's really no jurisdiction, so it's hard to legalize those things. But this thing called the Law of the Sea Treaty basically protects 36% of the ocean surface and 90% of its fish stocks. But unfortunately, this is that's basically like you're in charge of your waters, protect it as best you can. But a lot of countries hasn't really done. It looks big and the numbers look great, but it doesn't really protect it as well as you like it to. A lot of this law has been kind of manipulated and used to actually spawn more fishing than really protecting the fish stocks within it. Another one is called marine protected areas. And I have this poster, it's been in my classroom for a while. Marine protected areas, or MPAs, are basically areas where we have sought to do the most conservation or protection. If you can see here, this is just the United States. There's many in the United States. There's over like 120. These are just a few of the main ones. There's a little joke. So if you ever get a chance, find it in the room and check it out a little bit more. It's got a couple of jokes and just points out where those protected areas are. And although marine protected areas are good and they try to, restore and kind of keep in contact or and contain those different ecosystems, they all are still subject to trawling and not really trawling, but dredging and things like that. And they don't do a 100% good job at that, but at least they are a start in trying to protect those ecosystems. One that probably does the best, has the best concept, the best idea, it really stems from how we do our national parks, or these things called marine reserves. And basically these areas would be, and some of you talked about this in chapter 8 when we were talking about what can be done by us and by the government on how to better protect these areas. And one of those that the marine reserves where they actually close them to commercial fishing, dredging, mining, and waste disposal, where MPAs are not, but marine reserves would be. And they actually set up like a national park where you have a core zone where there's really no human activity allowed, no boating over, no snorkeling, no fishing, nothing. And then you kind of get a little bit more lenient as you go outward. So you're protecting a core area. And the less harmful activities allowed that would be allowed would be recreational boating, maybe shipping, because you're not really affecting it as much, and you're not really harvesting what's underneath the water. So those might be and outside the core zone would be allowed. So that's actually a very good concept and could be big in the future. They found that fully protected marine reserves do work fast. And when they did a study on this, they found that fish populations double in size, the fish themselves grow larger, the reproduction of the fish triples, And the species diversity nearly increases by almost 1/4 in a very, very short amount of time, which is a very good thing. And one of these things that we talked about before is in managing things. We looked at this way back in the Tragedy of the Commons. That's really good to manage a resource. And it's good to get many people involved in managing that resource. And one of the ways is called integrated coastal management, where it's not just the government coming in regulating who can fish what, who can do what, but it's also a community taking it upon themselves to say, hey, this is a resource that is valuable to us in many different ways, not just a harvest. It's valuable to the ecosystem. It's valuable to people looking at it and viewing it. It's valuable to the ecosystem itself, or the ecology of it all. So they actually came up with a couple of different community-based programs and group efforts, different people working together to help prevent, at least in their area, the degradation of the ocean. All right, that pauses us for 11.2. See you next time for 11.3.